The words "just a nurse" sound harmless on the surface. People say them every day without thinking twice. Sometimes it is said with humility. Sometimes it is said to avoid attention. And sometimes it is said because the world has quietly taught us to shrink certain roles, especially the ones built on care rather than command. Just a nurse becomes a way to explain yourself quickly, to lower expectations, to stay in your lane. It suggests limits before anyone even asks what you are capable of. But language has weight. Those two small words carry assumptions about value, authority, and power. They imply that real action belongs to someone else. Someone louder. Someone armed. Someone officially in charge. A nurse, in that framing, is meant to follow, not lead. To treat wounds, not stop the bleeding at its source. To stand back while others make the hard calls. Over time, people begin to believe it, including the ones saying it. In high-risk environments, those assumptions become dangerous. When chaos hits, the brain looks for labels. Soldier, civilian, medic, threat, asset, liability. Labels help us make fast decisions, but they also blind us. If someone is just a nurse, then they must be protected, relocated, shielded from danger. They are not expected to contribute beyond their assigned role. That expectation shapes behavior on both sides. The people around her act accordingly, and she is expected to do the same. What often gets ignored is what nurses are actually trained to do. They are taught to stay calm when others panic. They make life or death decisions with incomplete information. They assess risk in seconds. They work under pressure, exhaustion, noise, blood, and fear. They improvise when plans collapse. They adapt when resources run out. They act, not because they are fearless, but because someone needs them to. Those skills do not disappear just because the setting changes. Calling herself just a nurse was not a lie. It was a reflection of how society ranks professions. Combat is seen as brave. Care is seen as supportive. One is praised for strength, the other for compassion, as if the two cannot exist in the same body. That ranking seeps into how stories are told and how people see themselves. It tells nurses that their power stops at the edge of the hospital bed. It tells them their authority ends when someone with a weapon enters the room. There is also danger in internalizing that language. When people downplay their own capability, they sometimes hesitate at the exact moment they should act. They wait for permission that may never come. They assume someone else is better suited, better trained, more qualified. Just becomes a mental barrier. A pause. A second of doubt. In a crisis, that second can cost lives. At the same time, those words can hide strength in plain sight. When expectations are low, ability can move unnoticed. When someone is underestimated, they are not watched as closely. Their decisions are not second-guessed. Their instincts are not challenged until they suddenly matter. The phrase, just a nurse, can function like camouflage, allowing someone to step forward when the moment demands it, precisely because no one expected them to. There is a reason this phrase shows up so often in stories of quiet heroism. Teachers say just a teacher. Parents say just a mom. Caregivers, aides, volunteers, all learn to minimize their role because the world rewards loud confidence more than steady competence. But crises have a way of stripping language down to action. In those moments, labels stop working. Titles lose relevance. What matters is who can see clearly, move decisively, and accept responsibility without being asked. The danger of just a nurse is not that it is humble. The danger is that it teaches us to misjudge people right up until the second they prove us wrong. It trains us to overlook the ones who are actually prepared for the worst moments, because they do not fit our image of power. And it teaches capable people to doubt themselves, even when their hands already know what to do, even when their mind is already moving faster than the situation unfolding in front of them, even when everything they have learned is pushing them forward while the words they have been taught to say about themselves are telling them to stay back. When people talk about training, they often imagine classrooms, drills, checklists, and procedures neatly followed step by step. Training sounds controlled, predictable, almost mechanical. Instinct, on the other hand, is treated like something wild and unreliable, a gut feeling that either shows up or does not. In reality, The two are deeply connected. Instinct is often training that has been repeated so many times it no longer needs conscious thought. Under pressure, the brain does not rise to the occasion. It falls back on what it knows. That is why training matters. But not all training looks the same. Military training is built around threat recognition, coordination, and force. Medical training is built around assessment, prioritization, and preservation of life. Both demand clarity under stress. Both require rapid decision-making with limited information. The difference is the outcome they are designed to achieve, not the mental framework behind them. When chaos erupts, instinct does not ask what your job title is. It responds to patterns. A sudden change in environment. A person going down. A problem that needs immediate intervention. For a nurse, those patterns are familiar. The sounds may be different, the context more violent, but the mental process is not new. Scan the scene. Identify the biggest threat. Decide what matters now and what can wait. Act before hesitation spreads. In moments like these, formal training collides with human instinct. The SEALs move on theirs, shaped by years of combat preparation. They secure, cover, advance, protect. The nurse moves on hers, shaped by years of critical care. She notices what others might miss. The angle of exposure. The timing between movements. The vulnerability created when someone is hit. These are not random reactions. They are learned responses firing at speed. There is a common myth that people either freeze or fight under fire. That reaction is often framed as bravery versus fear. In truth, most people default to what they have practiced. A surgeon reaches for tools. A firefighter moves toward heat. A nurse moves toward injury. Instinct follows familiarity. When training is deep enough, action becomes automatic, even when the situation falls far outside the original setting. What makes this intersection powerful is adaptability. Training provides structure, but instinct fills the gaps when reality breaks the rules. No manual can account for every variable. No plan survives first contact unchanged. The ability to adjust in real time is what separates functional response from paralysis. Nurses are trained to do this daily. Patients crash without warning. Equipment fails. Information is incomplete. Priorities shift in seconds. That constant recalibration becomes second nature. When the rifle is picked up, it is not a rejection of medical identity. It is an extension of it. The underlying goal remains the same: stop the loss of life. The tool changes, but the intent does not. That decision is not driven by ego or adrenaline. It is driven by pattern recognition. If this threat continues, more people will be hurt. If action is delayed, outcomes worsen. Training and instinct converge into a single, unavoidable conclusion. This is where the gap between perceived roles and actual capability becomes clear. People assume that without specific combat training, someone will be useless in a firefight. What they overlook is the transferable nature of decision-making under stress. Situational awareness, risk assessment, timing. These are not exclusive to soldiers. They are human skills sharpened by experience. The environment changes, but the cognitive process remains intact. Instinct alone can be reckless. Training alone can be rigid. Together, they create controlled action. The nurse does not suddenly become a different person. She becomes exactly who she has been trained to be, responding to a new variable with an old discipline. Her hands may be holding a rifle instead of gauze, but her mind is still doing what it has always done, identifying the fastest way to stabilize a situation that is spiraling out of control. This collision of training and instinct challenges how we define preparedness. It suggests that readiness is not about memorizing specific scenarios, but about building mental resilience and adaptability. The ability to stay present when fear is loud. The ability to choose action over hesitation. The ability to trust what your experience has already taught you. Even when the situation looks nothing like the environment where that experience was gained, courage is often described as a decision, as if it is something you sit with, weigh carefully, and then choose when you feel ready. In reality, courage rarely announces itself in advance. It does not wait for confidence or approval. It shows up in moments that are messy, loud, and unfair, when there is no time to prepare a speech or check your qualifications. Courage does not ask if you are allowed to act. It only asks if you will. Most people think courage belongs to certain types of individuals. Soldiers, leaders, people who look the part, those who have been publicly recognized as brave. This belief creates an invisible barrier for everyone else. If you do not fit the image, you assume courage is not yours to claim. You assume someone else will step forward. Someone more official. Someone more trained. Someone whose role includes authority. That assumption is comfortable because it removes responsibility. In moments of crisis, permission is a luxury that does not exist. No one hands out clear instructions. No one pauses the chaos to assign roles. The situation moves whether you do or not. Courage in those moments is not about heroism. It is about refusing to stay passive when action is clearly needed. It is about stepping into uncertainty without knowing how the story will end. What makes courage difficult is not fear, but consequence. Acting means owning the outcome, good or bad. It means accepting that you might fail, that you might be judged, that you might make things worse before they get better. Waiting feels safer because it spreads responsibility across the room. Acting concentrates it on you. Courage is the willingness to carry that weight alone, even temporarily. There is also a quiet social pressure that tells people to stay in their place. Do your job. Know your lane. Do not overstep. These messages are subtle, but powerful. They teach people to hesitate even when their instincts are screaming. Courage pushes against that conditioning. It says that in certain moments, staying in your lane is the most dangerous choice available. The nurse does not stand up because she believes she is fearless. She stands up because the cost of doing nothing becomes unacceptable. Courage often begins when inaction starts to feel heavier than action, when the consequences of waiting are clearer than the risks of moving forward. At that point, courage is less about boldness and more about necessity. There is a misconception that courage feels strong and confident. More often, it feels shaky and unresolved. Your heart is racing. Your mind is loud. You are aware of every possible mistake. Courage does not silence doubt. It moves alongside it. It says you can be afraid and still act. You can be unsure and still step forward. Courage also does not ask for consensus. Waiting for agreement in a crisis often means waiting too long. Someone has to break the stillness. Someone has to go first. That first move is rarely perfect, but it creates momentum. It gives others permission to act as well. Courage has a ripple effect. One person stepping forward changes the energy of the entire situation. There is a difference between reckless action and courageous action. Recklessness ignores risk. Courage acknowledges it and moves anyway. The nurse understands the danger. She is not oblivious to the threat. She is acutely aware of it. That awareness informs her choice rather than stopping it. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that fear will not be the final authority. This idea challenges how people define bravery. If courage requires permission, then it is no longer courage. It becomes compliance. True courage exists precisely because no one has given you approval, because no one has told you it is safe or acceptable. It exists in the gap between what is expected of you and what the moment demands from you. When someone acts without permission, it disrupts the hierarchy. It forces others to reevaluate their assumptions about who is capable and who is not. That disruption can be uncomfortable. It can even be threatening, but it is often necessary. Progress, survival, and change rarely come from waiting politely for clearance. Courage does not belong to a title or a uniform. It belongs to the person who recognizes that the situation requires more than observation. It belongs to the one who is willing to be wrong in public rather than passive in private. It belongs to the person who understands that some moments will never offer permission and chooses to act anyway in normal life. Roles create order. They tell us who decides, who follows, who speaks, and who waits. Roles make complex systems work by setting expectations. In hospitals, in the military, in offices, and in families, roles help prevent chaos. They allow people to focus on their specific responsibilities and trust that others will handle theirs. Most of the time, this structure is necessary and effective. But roles are designed for stability, not for collapse. They work best when the environment is predictable, when resources are available, and when authority is clear. In a true crisis, those conditions disappear. Plans break. Communication fails. Leadership may be absent or overwhelmed. In those moments, rigid roles can become obstacles rather than safeguards. The moment roles stop matching is usually quiet, not dramatic. It happens when someone realizes that waiting for the correct person to act will take too long. When the chain of command cannot respond at the speed required. When the situation does not match any predefined protocol. That realization creates a gap, a space where responsibility is suddenly unassigned. Most people feel uncomfortable in that gap. Without a role to hide behind, they feel exposed. Roles provide cover, not just physically but psychologically. They allow people to say, "This is not mine to handle." When roles disappear, that protection vanishes. What remains is a simple question: what can I do right now that will help? In that moment, competence becomes more important than authority. The person who can act effectively becomes more relevant than the person with the highest rank. This is not a rejection of leadership, but a response to urgency. Leadership in crisis often emerges horizontally rather than vertically. It shifts to whoever has the clearest view and the fastest response. This shift can be unsettling, especially in environments built on hierarchy. When a nurse steps beyond her expected function, it challenges assumptions about control and expertise. It forces others to confront the possibility that the system they rely on is no longer sufficient. That discomfort is a sign that the moment has outgrown the structure designed to contain it. When roles dissolve, identity follows. People stop thinking of themselves as their job titles and start thinking in terms of action. What needs to be done? Who is hurt? Where is the threat? These questions replace concerns about permission and protocol. The focus narrows to survival and outcome. In that narrowing, unnecessary distinctions fall away. This does not mean that training or experience becomes irrelevant. On the contrary, it becomes more visible. Without roles dictating behavior, skill rises to the surface. People reveal what they actually know how to do, not what they are assigned to do. The crisis becomes a kind of truth test, exposing both strengths and limitations without regard for status. The danger of clinging to roles in a collapsing situation is hesitation. People wait for cues that will never come. They look to leaders who are no longer in a position to lead. They defer to systems that are no longer functioning. That hesitation can be fatal. The refusal to let go of roles can freeze an entire group, even when individuals within it are capable of acting. When someone breaks from their role and acts, it often creates a new temporary order. Others adjust around that action. They fill in where needed. They respond rather than wait. The group reorganizes itself based on necessity instead of hierarchy. This is not chaos. It is adaptation. There is a common fear that abandoning roles leads to disorder. In reality, disorder comes from pretending that roles still apply when they do not. Adaptation requires flexibility, not anarchy. It requires people to recognize when the old rules no longer serve the situation and to replace them with immediate, practical responses. The nurse picking up a rifle is not trying to redefine her profession. She is responding to the disappearance of structure. In that instant, the role of nurse, soldier, or civilian becomes secondary to the role of someone who can act. The label matters less than the capability. The action matters more than the assignment. These moments are uncomfortable because they reveal how much of our behavior is shaped by expectation rather than necessity. They show how often we wait for structure to tell us what to do, even when the answer is obvious. When roles stop matching, what remains is individual responsibility, stripped of titles and safety nets. This idea extends beyond extreme situations. In smaller crises, in workplaces, in communities, and in personal lives, people often wait for roles to authorize action. They wait for someone else to lead, to fix, to decide. The moment roles stop matching is the moment someone chooses to act based on need rather than permission. Crisis has a way of cutting through assumptions faster than any conversation ever could. It does not care about resumes, reputations, or how people are usually perceived. When pressure is extreme and time is short, the usual signals of competence lose their meaning. What matters is who can function, who can adapt, and who can act. In that environment, hidden capability surfaces, often in people no one was watching. Most abilities remain invisible because normal life rarely demands their full use. People move through routines that only require a fraction of what they are capable of. Skills stay dormant. Strengths stay untested. Society rewards predictability, not depth. As long as things are stable, there is no reason for deeper capacity to show itself. Crisis disrupts that stability and forces everything into the open. Hidden capability often exists because people have been underestimated, sometimes by others, sometimes by themselves. When expectations are low, performance is rarely examined closely. A nurse is expected to care, not command. A support role is expected to assist, not lead. These expectations shape how people are seen and how they see themselves. Capability that does not match the stereotype is ignored, even when it is present all along. Crisis removes the luxury of selective attention. Suddenly, every action counts. Every decision has immediate consequences. People who can think clearly under pressure stand out, regardless of their title. The environment becomes a filter that amplifies certain traits: adaptability, composure, decisiveness, situational awareness. These traits are not evenly distributed across roles, but across individuals. One of the most revealing aspects of crisis is how quickly competence becomes obvious. There is no time to explain yourself or prove your credentials. You either contribute effectively or you do not. Hidden capability reveals itself through action, not assertion. A person steps forward, solves a problem, stabilizes a situation, and others adjust around that competence instinctively. This exposure can be uncomfortable for systems built on hierarchy. When someone outside the expected role performs at a high level, it challenges the assumptions holding the structure together. It raises quiet questions. Why was this ability overlooked? Why was this person not trusted earlier? Why do we equate capability so closely with position? Crisis also reveals how much people underestimate themselves. Many do not know what they are capable of until they are forced to act. Without time to doubt or seek approval, they discover that their experience transfers, that their judgment holds, that their instincts are reliable. What felt theoretical suddenly becomes practical. What felt insufficient becomes enough. Hidden capability is rarely about sudden transformation. People do not become new versions of themselves in a crisis. They access parts of themselves that were already there, but unused. The nurse does not become brave overnight. She reveals courage that had never been required in that form before. She does not suddenly learn to assess risk. She applies a skill honed over years in a new context. Crisis also exposes the cost of ignoring hidden capability. When people are boxed into narrow roles, organizations lose resilience. They depend too heavily on a few visible leaders and overlook the depth of talent around them. In emergencies, this creates bottlenecks. Decisions slow down. Action stalls. Meanwhile, capable individuals remain sidelined because no one thought to look their way. There is a lesson here beyond extreme situations. Many environments never reach the level of crisis that forces truth into the open. As a result, hidden capability stays buried indefinitely. People leave jobs, teams, or communities without ever being fully seen. Systems remain inefficient, not because talent is lacking, but because it is misrecognized. Crisis does not create ability, but it does redistribute attention. It forces people to look beyond labels and notice outcomes. It shifts the question from who is supposed to do this to who can do this. That shift is where hidden capability finally has room to appear. What makes these moments powerful is not just the revelation of individual strength, but the reframing of what capability looks like. It becomes less about credentials and more about effectiveness, less about confidence and more about clarity, less about authority and more about responsibility. Once revealed, hidden capability cannot be unseen. The memory of who stepped up lingers. It changes how people are perceived afterward, even if the system slowly returns to its old habits. It also changes the person who acted. They carry the knowledge of what they can do under pressure, a knowledge that does not fade easily. Crisis is a harsh teacher, but an honest one. It strips away performance and exposes substance. It shows that potential is often deeper and more widely distributed than anyone assumes, waiting not for recognition, but for necessity to pull it to the surface. Heroism is usually presented as something loud and unmistakable. A charge forward, a clear villain, a dramatic victory. The hero looks the part, and the story wraps neatly around them. Titles, uniforms, and public recognition make it easy to identify who the hero is supposed to be. This version of heroism is comfortable because it follows familiar patterns. Real situations rarely do. When danger is sudden and the outcome uncertain, heroism does not arrive fully formed. It emerges in fragments. A decision made under pressure, a step taken without applause, an action that feels obvious to the person doing it and extraordinary to everyone watching. In these moments, heroism is less about image and more about function. Titles and uniforms are designed to signal responsibility. They help people know who is in charge and who to look to for direction. But signals are not the same as substance. A uniform does not guarantee clarity under stress. A title does not ensure courage. When circumstances overwhelm the structure those signals represent, people are forced to look past them. Redefining heroism begins with separating action from identity. Instead of asking who this person is, the better question becomes what this person is doing. Who is moving toward the problem? Who is reducing harm? Who is making the situation better rather than safer for themselves? In that framework, heroism becomes accessible to anyone willing to act. This redefinition is uncomfortable because it disrupts hierarchy. If heroism is not tied to rank, then it can appear anywhere. It can come from someone without authority, without recognition, without formal power. That challenges the idea that bravery is earned through status rather than choice. There is also a cultural bias toward visible strength. Physical power, weapons, and aggression are often equated with heroism, while restraint, care, and protection are treated as secondary. When someone whose primary identity is care takes decisive action, it blurs that distinction. It forces a reconsideration of what strength actually looks like under pressure. The nurse's action does not erase the courage of the SEALs. It reframes it. It shows that heroism is not a fixed role occupied by a single type of person. It is a shared space that opens when conditions demand it. Multiple forms of bravery can exist at the same time, each responding to the same threat in different ways. This broader definition also removes the myth of the chosen hero. The idea that certain people are destined to rise while others are meant to be protected creates passivity. It encourages bystanders to wait and assumes capability is rare. Redefining heroism recognizes that readiness is widespread, even if opportunity is not. When heroism is tied to titles, people who act outside those titles are treated as exceptions. They become inspirational stories precisely because they break the mold. But the mold itself is the problem. If courage is always unexpected, then expectations are too narrow. Redefining heroism does not mean glorifying every action taken in a crisis. It means recognizing intention and responsibility over image. It means valuing judgment, timing, and restraint as much as boldness. Sometimes the most heroic choice is not the loudest one, but the one that stabilizes chaos and prevents further harm. This perspective also changes how people see themselves. When heroism is defined by identity, most people exclude themselves automatically. They do not see themselves as heroes in waiting. When heroism is defined by action, the barrier lowers. Responsibility feels closer. The question shifts from "Am I a hero?" to "What does this moment require from me?" There is power in that shift. It encourages preparedness rather than fantasy. It focuses attention on skills, awareness, and decision-making rather than admiration. It suggests that heroism is less about becoming someone else and more about fully inhabiting who you already are when it matters most. Stories like this matter because they expand the category of who counts. They remind people that courage is not owned by a profession or guaranteed by training alone. It is activated by circumstance and sustained by choice. Redefining heroism beyond titles and uniforms does not diminish those who wear them. It honors the reality that in the moments that matter most, humanity steps forward before hierarchy does.